The Detroit Tigers and the Seattle Mariners will face off in the American League Divisional Series. We are going to preview said series today on Locked On Tigers and a crossover edition, Locked On Mariners.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of Locked On Tigers, and today also Locked On Mariners, as we are joined by Tyden Gonzalez, which I also have to say, I've never told you this, you have the best name in the entire network, and I feel like it's one of those names that you have to say like the full everything to really appreciate how great it is.
I like how when Locked On sometimes clips our show, it automatically captions it as Tony Gonzalez. So I'm also a Hall of Fame tight end.
Right. You're maybe the greatest tight end to ever live. That's pretty impressive. Welcome in, everyone. We are going to do just a series preview. From my perspective, the Tigers we did one of these types of shows with you guys at Locked On Guardians going into the wildcard series. Obviously, the Mariners in a position where they have not played a postseason game yet with the bye in the first round. So this will be your first preview. I'm sure it's a little bit of just nice to know finally who you play after waiting all week and watching just ridiculous baseball, honestly, for about 27 innings in that wild card round. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the app today. Same format as the wild card preview here. We're going to spend one segment talking about the strengths of both teams, one segment talking about maybe the weaknesses. I'm sure there will be far more on my side of thing than yours. And then we'll do series predictions and kind of wrap things up in segment 3. So the strengths is an interesting place that I want to start with. Ours is one very obvious human being on the roster. But from the Mariners' perspective, going into the season, I can remember saying on like my show's series preview that I thought the Mariners had objectively one of the two best rotations in the sport. And while the talent is still there, obviously like Castillo, right, Wu, injuries happen to everybody, but from a talent perspective, I think it's pretty much like you guys in the Phillies, yet the season stats for starting rotation ERA they're fine. They're not terrible or anything, but they're, middle of the pack, just outside the top 10. So I want to ask from your perspective, is that a strength still for the M's going into this series? Kind of how have the last, you're maybe the hottest team in baseball in September, how have the last month or two looked from Seattle's perspective?
Yeah, so on the rotation, I would say that it's still a strength. It's just not as much of a strength as maybe we would have expected. Sure. If you told us, hey, the Mariners are going to be in the playoffs, this year, like you would assume like, oh, the pitching is the reason that you got there. It's not really, that hasn't really been the case. Because like for the last couple of years, it's just been like, just get that rotation in the playoffs and just see what happens. Get the rotation in. Now it's more like, it's more of just a balanced approach from this club. A big reason for that is, again, injuries, right? George Kirby missed the start of the season with a shoulder issue. Logan Gilbert missed a good portion of the first half of the season with an elbow issue. And I don't think that is necessarily entirely cleaned up. I think he's kind of pitching through it right now. And we'll see what happens in the offseason when, we find out the truth from guys, because they don't like to tell us what they're dealing with until after the year. So especially I'm sure we'll find it.
Man. They are just stubborn people.
Yeah. So I'm sure we'll probably hear that, Logan Gilbert needs a cleanup in the offseason. Maybe George Kirby still is dealing with something. He's lowered his arm slot to, accommodate for that. Or maybe he's also maybe he just likes that more. Who knows? Bryce Miller has also dealt with, a forearm thing that he said earlier on the season. He needs to have surgery to completely fix. So he's just kind of pitched through that as well. I don't think we'll be pitching out of the rotation in this series. I think you'll be pitching out of the bullpen. We'll see what that ultimately looks like. I think maybe that also a little bit is dependent on whether or not Brian Wu can start in this series. And it right now doesn't seem like that might be the case. Yesterday, he threw a bullpen. He threw to some live hitters before their scrimmage game. And he told the media, like, I feel pretty good, like things are good, but I'm not necessarily up to game speed yet. And about a week from now, I'm hoping that we're there. Well, a week from now, or a week from yesterday, would be the travel day before game 5.
Right.
So, we don't even know if they're going to have to play that game. So it's very possible we don't see Brian Wu in this series. But still, because of how talented this rotation still is, and over the last month, it has been a lot better. Especially Luis Castillo has been a huge stabilizer for this rotation after having a really rough stretch. I still think it is a strength, but to me, the biggest strength of this club is the offense. This lineup, especially after the trade deadline, getting Josh Naylor, getting Eugenio Suarez, there are no free outs in this lineup anymore. Yeah. And they can be justifiably platoonless if they want to be. Now, you're probably going to see Mitch Garver in the lineup against Tarek Skubal in game 2. You'll probably see Victor Robles in there just for his defense, just to get that in there, right? But for the most part, like, Dom Canzone has been a revelation this year. He was struggling to hit against lefties in the minors this season. Then he got called up, and hitting against lefties has not been a problem for him. So 1 through 9, there are no breaks in this lineup. It's going to be a fascinating series, especially that game 2 against Skubal, him against this lineup, which to me, at the very least, is the best lineup the Mariners have had since 2001, when they had Ichiro and Edgar and Brett Boone and all those guys.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think it's one of the, if not post trade deadline, I think there's an argument it's the best lineup in the American League. Just super fun baseball in September. While I was wanting to stab my eyes with a fork watching my team play, you guys offered me great relief at the 10 p.m. Late night Eastern window. And played some really, really fun baseball. I'm glad you brought the trade deadline, though, because that's been a big point of tension in the Tigers fan base. Is Tigers were the first team in baseball to 30, 40, 50, 60 wins, and then barely made the playoffs, and did absolutely nothing at the trade deadline to bolster or reinforce their team. They were in on Suarez. They were in on Naylor. They were in on the guys that the Seattle specifically, ended up acquiring. The only real acquisition they made was Kyle Finnegan, who's been fantastic in the bullpen. But that's really it. And they didn't help the offense at all. And the offense has struggled. But I mean, as you mentioned, if we're talking about strengths, very obviously the offense for Seattle has been a top 10 unit in baseball. And as we just said, is one of the best post All-Star break and post deadline. Certainly the Tigers' strength is Tarek Skubal and being able to throw him twice in a 5-game series. And I think that the way that they have it, like, I don't want to put the weight or result of the entire series on one guy's shoulders. Ultimately, the offense, we'll see what happens. We'll talk about that here in a second. But for the strength of this organization, it's the fact that in a 2-2-1 series, they can throw Skubal in one of the first 2 on the road. Game 2 it'll be, as you mentioned. Hopefully you can split one of the 2 in Seattle. Then you get 2 home games. And then if the series isn't decided, you can throw Skubal again in the winner go home game 5. Like, that is their advantage that nobody, I mean, maybe outside of like a crazy universe where Pittsburgh is a playoff team, there's really no other team in baseball that can throw that caliber of pitcher twice in a series. And so that is what they're going to rely on. And if Seattle steals a game, either game against Tarek, then I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for the Tigers to win. In the same breath, if the Tigers win game 1, when it's gonna, honestly, I'll tell you right now, it's looking like a bullpen game. Like, they legitimately don't have a starting pitcher ready for game 1. Mize and Flaherty just threw in Cleveland. Skubal won't be ready until game 2, and they don't have any other starters justifiably good enough to start in a playoff game. So, like, if you can steal that game 1, then all of a sudden you go from we're up 1-0 on the road and can throw Tarek still 2 more times. That kind of puts you in the driver's seat. But I really think, again, not to be too dramatic about one guy, but everything kind of revolves around how they do and if they can win when Tarek Skubal's on the mound.
Yeah, and that's really, to me, the biggest storyline heading into this weekend and heading into the home portion of this series for the Mariners. I think winning game one for the Mariners is way more important to them than it is for the Tigers.
Sure.
Because if you lose that bullpen game, where it's such a great advantage for you, now you're staring down the barrel of being down 2-0 because you got to face Skubal. And now, look, the Mariners have been very good against Skubal this year.
They have.
They smoked him in Detroit before the All-Star break. It's still Tarek Skubal, right? And this is like, to me, when I see him, I see 2014 Madison Bumgarner,
right?
And what he did for that Giants team, right? So I assume that going into game two, that game is probably going to be like 2-1.
You're right.
If the Mariners are going to win it, right? So, if it's not great, awesome, cool. If the Mariners jump on him again, awesome. But I'm seeing like too many Mariners fans, too many Mariners creators, like looking at what they did against Skubal in a couple of regular season games this year and going, oh yeah, that's fine. They'll be fine. So right. I don't buy into that at all. I very much respect Tarek Skubal and who he is. And I'm going to assume he's going to make the necessary adjustments against this club.
Yeah. And we even saw against Cleveland, we'll get to a break here in a second, but we even saw against Cleveland, the stuff in the second half. He was still, like barely an ERA over 2 in the second half. He was still dominant, but there was like a little bit taken off. He was throwing 96 instead of 100, right? And against Cleveland in that 14 strikeout game, that was, everything was back. Like he was back to just every fastball was 99, 100. The changeup looks like the best pitch in the sport again, as we've become accustomed to, etc. Now, because it's a strength to have Tarek Skubal twice, that also means, to your point, if Seattle can hit him hard or even just win the game, they don't even have to get to Tarek necessarily. They can win the games that he starts, then this series is not going to be extremely competitive in my eyes, and Seattle's just going to have the upper hand. So let's talk about the weaknesses for both teams. As I mentioned, the Tigers probably have more than Seattle going into this series, but we'll talk about the weaknesses and kind of maybe where the opponent can pounce. We will do that right after this. Got to talk to y'all about our friends over at PrizePicks. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Every day we make decisions, but on PrizePicks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss the excitement of this football season with PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. Playing PrizePicks is a fun, simple way to add more excitement to football. You just pick more or less on player projections like Josh Allen passing yards or Saquon Barkley for a rushing touchdown in your game. It's quick. My favorite part is they also just added a new feature called Stacks. So if you want to ride one player specifically, you can select their passing yards, rushing yards, touchdowns, all in one lineup. Also, it's fun to follow players on the app and copy their lineups all with one quick click as well. So download PrizePicks today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of a crossover edition of Locked On Tigers and Locked On Mariners. I'm Scott Bentley, joined by Ty Dane Gonzalez. So let's talk about the weaknesses for this team, or for both teams, rather. Obviously, the strengths are kind of well documented at this point. You have two of the best players in baseball, Tigers with Skubal, the Mariners, obviously, with Raleigh, putting together one of the best seasons by a catcher, maybe the best season by a catcher in the history of baseball. What are maybe the weaknesses, or I don't even want to use the word weaknesses, maybe just some of the areas that you are concerned about going into this first playoff series for the Mariners in 2025?
Well, I mean, it has to start with Brian Wu's availability.
Sure.
And if he's not available, that is a problem, because he has been by far the most trustworthy arm in this Mariners rotation.
He's been
obviously
good, man.
Yeah, obviously this rotation is still good enough to win this series without him. But again, like, there's been a lot of inconsistencies from Logan Gilbert, from George Kirby, from Luis Castillo. So not having Brian Wu in this series would be a massive swing in the direction of the Tigers. The other two things that I would mention here, Infield defense for the Mariners has been a legitimate problem, particularly up the middle. And because, they're trying to get Dom Canzone in the game, but, in the lineup, while also keeping Victor Robles' defense out in right field, that means Jorge Polanco has to play second base. He's been a problem. The biggest problem, however, has been J.P. Crawford at shortstop. He has no range whatsoever, and his throws over to first have been scary for a good while now. Thankfully, Josh Naylor is an incredible defensive first baseman. And an incredibly smart defensive first baseman, and he has been able to make up for a lot of those issues. Gino Suarez has also significantly regressed over there at third base. I am fascinated to see what the ALDS roster is going to look like, and by the time that you're watching this, you may already know. I am curious to see if the Mariners add a couple of guys that weren't on the major league roster at the end of the regular season to this roster for defensive purposes, for late game defensive replacement purposes, like Ben Williamson, to swap in there for Gino Suarez late in games after, Gino has his last at bat of the game, because Ben Williamson is a fantastic defensive third baseman. He quite literally won them a game in Sacramento earlier this year with his glove. So I'm curious to see that. I'm curious to see if, they throw in Leo Rivas late in games at second base or shortstop to make up for, the defensive inefficiencies of JP Crawford or Jorge Polanco. Obviously, defense as a whole, still, Julio might be the best defensive center fielder in the game. Cal Raleigh might be the best defensive catcher in the game, but particularly that infield defense, second, third, and shortstop, that does concern me quite a bit. And the other one is this bullpen has a lot of dudes in it, has a lot of talented arms in it. And for the most part, they've been very, very good this year. But when I watch them, I don't feel super easy, and that might be the thing for all 30 fan bases with their bullpens, right? Even Padres fans probably, don't feel great when Mason Miller is out there, just because it's a reliever, right? Even though he's like the most dominant arm maybe in the entire game, like it's just, it's a reliever, right? So, but still, like Andres Munoz has had a fantastic year, but at times his command and control just isn't there. Matt Brash is in his first season post Tommy John surgery, and he's a guy that has to get chase. He has to get whiffs. And for weeks at a time, he has just not been able to do that. And then for a couple weeks, he's dominant. He's, the Matt Brash we all know and love. Gabe Spire and Edward Bizardo have been the two most consistent arms in this bullpen. And to me, I think they are the biggest key players in this entire series for the Mariners, particularly Spire, and to a slightly lesser degree, the other lefty that they have in Caleb Ferguson, because as you all know, the Mariners are going to deploy those guys to erase Kerry Carpenter, to potentially erase Riley Green. And that means Jahmai Jones is going to come into the game. That means Andy Ibanez might come into the game. Maybe Matt Vierling if he gets activated, right? So to me, honestly, we're all looking at the series and we're going, well, the biggest at-bats in the series are going to be Skubal versus Raleigh, Skubal versus Julio, Gilbert versus Green, Gilbert versus, or Kirby versus Carpenter, et cetera, right? I think the biggest at-bats in the series, the biggest swing at-bats in the series might be Gabe Spire versus Jahmai Jones and Gabe Spire versus Andy Ibanez.
I think that's a great point, because we like AJ just has, his trigger finger itches. Like he's just ready at all times to pull trig on a sub or on a pinch hitting opportunity. And we saw in Cleveland, Stephen Vogt tried to snuff that, right? And we saw him go to, game 3 is a great example where righty starter. So AJ puts out his all of his lefties, Parker Meadows, Kerry Carpenter. Obviously, Riley Green plays every day no matter what, but still, he puts out all those guys. And then in the third inning, Vogt gets the hook out and goes to a lefty for the next 2 times through the lineup to try to get AJ to get his best hitters out of this game. And obviously the Tigers did enough to win, and AJ didn't end up pinch hitting any of those guys. So I think that'll be a super interesting storyline of, how many at-bats does Kerry Carpenter get against, lefties. And I think that is certainly going to be, there's a chance the highest leverage at-bats of this series are legitimately those pinch hitting, opportunities, at least from the Tigers' perspective. And then obviously the Mariners, just have kind of studs top to bottom. And like, from the Tigers' perspective, the weaknesses are pretty well documented. It's it kind of is, what team do you want to talk about, right? If we're talking about the weaknesses of the first 100 game Detroit Tigers, there's honestly not a lot. And they're also a top to bottom lineup that has, 9 guys with OPS pluses and WRC pluses over 100, right? And that's there might not be a Cal Raleigh, right? A guy that has a borderline 1,000 OPS, but that's still tough to navigate. It is, 9 above league average hitters is a really tough lineup to navigate. You can get production from anywhere. The problem is the last 6 weeks of the season, that stopped happening. And Glaber fell off a cliff, and Riley Green fell off a cliff, and even Kerry Carpenter struggled a lot. Spencer Torkelson had like a 40% K rate in the second half. Like, they just, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong in the last 6 weeks of the season. So if they're still spiraling, then this will be over in 3 games because they can't hit, and Tarek Skubal's the only pitcher they have. But if that Cleveland win, exercise the demon, then you're talking about maybe a little bit of, relaxed approach from the Tigers, and maybe a little bit more of what we saw from them in the first 100 games when they were the best team in baseball for a large majority of that. So I think that the offense is, obviously RISP was the big storyline in Cleveland. They went 1 for 15 with runners in scoring position in Cleveland in game 2 alone, that is. So you're hoping that they can that's the frustrating part, is they're getting on base. They just then can't hit anybody in once they get on base. It's not like they're getting no hit every game. They're scoring 1 run because they have, 15 base runners and are still only scoring once. The bullpen, you have 2 dogs in the back end in Will Vest and Kyle Finnegan. Both have been fantastic. Will Vest, I know, is an interesting storyline for the Mariners.
Yeah.
Who
you guys have 3 former Mariners in your bullpen. You have Paul Sewald, Rafael Montero, and Will Vest. And
right.
On Sewald specifically, I don't know if he'll make the ALDS roster, if I can speak. I am a professional podcaster after all. But I don't know if he'll make the roster. But there is the potential there for a Dominic Canzone, Paul Sewald battle, which I don't know if you know the story behind that, but they were traded for one another.
Right.
So there's a little extra there too for Mariners fans. So that'll be fascinating to see. And hey, maybe we'll see him tomorrow or tonight if you're watching this with the bullpen game happening.
For sure. Yeah. We'll see. Sewald's been interesting because he just got activated like 10 days before the end of the season. So like, we don't even really know what we have in Sewald. Yeah, so I mean the bullpen is you have 2 trustworthy guys in the back end, and then the rest is kind of a question mark, to be honest, and has been for a majority of the year. And the biggest issue with the bullpen is, outside of Finnegan and Vest, you're talking about an entire pen that lacks swing and miss. And in the postseason against a good lineup like this, you are going to need to get strikeouts, and they just do not have that outside of those 2 gentlemen in the back end, and that's going to be really tough to navigate. So that's a huge concern for me. I already mentioned, the offense. Is it a weakness or a strength? I don't even know, dude. Like, it's a roll of the dice. I have no clue which version of the Tigers team we're going to get. And then, the rotation outside of Skubal was a strong point in the first half, and was very much a weak point in the second half. 2 guys they traded for at the deadline to join the rotation are probably not even going to be on this ALDS roster. And Paddock, who's still in the organization, but didn't make the wild card roster. And then Charlie Morton, who legit got cut, a month after acquiring him because he was, had an ERA of 7. So, it's what version of Casey Mize are you going to get? What version of Jack Flaherty are you going to get? Is this bullpen going to be able to get strikeouts against a good lineup? And is this I just listed the whole team outside of Tarek Skubal. Like, that is where the Tigers are at. That's the question mark that resides in Detroit.
Yeah. The thing that I've told my listeners though, is like, the Tigers were able to survive complete and utter disaster for a reason, because they built such a great enough buffer because they were so good in the first half. Right. And now that you get to the playoffs, you reset. right? Like it's a whole new ball game now. And I have the utmost respect for the Tigers and what they did in the first half and just how they're built, that, I don't look at this as any sort of like cakewalk or anything like that. I look at this as a very, very, very good matchup with a team that just got a huge proverbial monkey off of their backs with the Guardians, after blowing the division lead to them, after getting eliminated by them last year. AJ Hench has managed in a lot of big games. He knows more often than not when to press the right button in these particular situations, and you got kind of that road warrior mentality now after going into Cleveland, which again has been a problem area for you guys, and you overcame that. And now you're going into the thing that I'll say about Seattle is that it's a different animal. Now we've only seen one playoff game there since 2001, but if you've watched football, you know how the environments are, for Seahawks games.
That almost adds to it too, right? The fact that there have been so few almost makes it more hostile because you want to, right, a la Pittsburgh, like 2014, right? It's a similar vibe to that.
Yeah, it's going to be insane in that stadium. Like, I'll just warn you now, it's going to be nuts. For sure. And as soon as something goes right in the Mariners' direction, like, oh boy. And, they didn't score a single run in their one playoff game they got. And, since 2001, they played 18 innings and got shut out against the Astros. So we're all also kind of like waiting with bated breath for the first run at T-Mobile Park since 2001 in a playoff game. So we'll see how early that happens, if at all.
Right. No, I can tell you it almost certainly will this time around. As long as it happens in game one, we will continue this. I'm way late on a break here. So we'll do that. And then we'll get to series predictions and kind of put a bow on this. We'll do that right after this. Got to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to bet, and that's something I talk about all the time, but you can build parlays, try player props, even follow the live lines during games. Makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action, and obviously baseball is no different, especially in these high-intensity playoff games. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, everybody, welcome back. Third and final segment of this crossover edition of Locked On Tigers and Locked On Mariners. So just want to put a bow on everything before we get to our, exact pencil in some predictions here. I think the hope in Detroit is that series win against Cleveland just completely evaporates all of the tension and white knuckling that's been going on right over the last 6 weeks, and all of the swinging out of your shoes and terrible approaches and everybody pressing way too hard goes away, and you can go back to playing that fun, competitive, team-oriented brand of baseball that made them so hard to beat in the first 100 games of the season. Now, that's a lot easier said than done. You're doing it, as you mentioned, in a very hostile environment in those first 2 games. Not worried about Tarek Skubal in those. He thrives in those, but that's one player, and you still got a lot of innings around that to deal with, and an offense that has to actually hit the baseball, which has been a big problem over the last month or so. So any final thoughts on just kind of where the M's stand and what you're hoping to see out of this set?
Again, it just comes down to what version of George Kirby are we going to get? What version of Logan Gilbert are we going to get? What version of Luis Castillo are we going to get? Is Brian Wu actually going to be a factor in this series? All of that. And then, depending on what the answer is there, can this offense do what it did over the course of the regular season? Because it's a very different animal in the playoffs.
For sure.
Runs are such a premium no matter what the pitching matchup is, even if it's a bullpen day. It's just a different animal. This offense was able to mask some of the deficiencies of this rotation and carry things at times, especially over the course of that that are coming out of the trade deadline rather, where they had the really hot homestand and then they went on the road and the pitching fell apart and the team kind of fell apart as a result. Like, can they, if they need to, can they score 7 runs? That's the big thing. And look, they are built in a way that is conducive to scoring runs in the postseason. They hit a bunch of home runs. They have a bunch of guys that can hit 3 or 4 home runs in a single inning. Obviously, it's Cal, but it's Randy Arozarena, who we haven't even mentioned, by the way.
Yeah.
We all know the playoff Randy thing,
right.
and I cannot wait to see if that continues in a Seattle
100%.
Mariners uniform. I mean, when they traded for him last summer, I was like, playoff Randy, here we go. It's Julio, who now, like, because of the lineup that they built, for the last couple of years, it was like, well, if Julio doesn't perform, you're cooked. Now it's like, if Julio does anything, it's kind of a bonus. And if he goes 0 for 4 on a night, it's like, well, Josh Naylor got this, Eugenio Suarez got this. Like, you go down the line. So can they score consistently? Can they grind out a couple of runs against Tarek Skubal when they need to, especially if their backs are kind of against the wall? Maybe game 1 doesn't go their way and you go into game 2 staring down that, a 2-0 deficit with maybe the best pitcher in the entire game on the bump. Like, can you scrape together enough runs in that situation? The other thing too, real quick, and I'll stop yapping after this.
Oh, no, you're good.
Dan Wilson is a first-time manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's played in a lot of playoff games, on some of the most iconic teams in Mariners history, and some of just the most iconic teams of the 90s, right? And while the players love playing for him, and he's a great clubhouse guy and all that, his in-game managing has been a problem more often than not this year. Is he going to press the right buttons when it comes down to it? Is he going to be able to go blow for blow with AJ Hinch, who's been here and done that a lot, right? Now, I think on the bullpen management side of things, it's kind of foolproof because, again, because the playoffs, especially the ALDS, you get a day off after every 2 days. You don't have to worry about bullpen availability, really, unless someone's dealing with something that we don't know about. So I think that plan should be mostly laid out for him, and he just has to pull the lever at the right time, so long as you don't go and play 18 innings again in the ALDS. Maybe don't do that. More so for me, it's like bunting, giving the Tigers free outs. I get it if you do it against Skubal, right? If you want to lay down a squeeze with a runner on third and just 1 out and you need to get a run against Skubal, okay, I understand that. But if, say, Tyler Holton is in the game and you have him on the ropes and he's given up, the first 2 base runners, don't try and bunt over those 2 runners and give him that free out and allow him to kind of reset, even though now there's runners in scoring position, because this team has been mediocre at best hitting with runners in scoring position with 1 or 2 outs. They're about 15th in the league in WRC plus. They're about bottom 5 in average on base, slugging, etc. So that's the big question to me is Dan, and how does he handle this?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a great point. I think the world of AJ, I think that a lot of times he, in our own division, really, like, Stephen Vogt's also great, but when we play in divisional games, like, AJ has won us so many games. Like, I don't want to say by himself, he's not out there, but you know what I mean. Like, he has pulled all the right strings in a lot of games over the last calendar, 14 months. So I'm sure that will be a factor as well in the pinch hitting you talked about, and then when to utilize guys like Holton and to try to get Naylor, keep him on the bench or get him out of the game, kind of snuff that maybe against lefties. But I mean, maybe he's going to enter as a pinch runner at this point. Golly. So
Speed demon Josh Naylor, 30 bags, man. 30 bags. Crazy.
Exactly. So it's my favorite storyline of the season. I'm not even kidding. So, okay, let's end on some predictions here. I'll start by, this is a little bit of a cop-out because it's almost like 1.5. I really think that this is either over quickly and Seattle just proves that they're the better team, or they play with their food. The Tigers stick around and are able to throw Scooble in a game 5. So for the homer in me, we'll pick Tigers in 5 just because I don't want to get yelled at by my own fan base. But I also think there's a very good chance, honestly, that it's just Seattle in 3. If they go up 2-0 at home and then you don't have Scooble when it comes to Detroit, you're going to be in big trouble. So those are kind of the two things. I think Detroit has to stick around, and if they do, they can just last long enough to throw Tarek again. If they don't do that, then I think Seattle's going to just have the upper hand and get it over pretty quickly.
I'm a Mariners fan. I've been tortured for basically my entire baseball watching life. I feel so uncomfortable making any sort of predictions, especially in the Mariners' favor.
I understand completely as a Lions fan. I am. Yes, I understand.
Yeah. You get it. You get it. So I'll say M's in 4. I'll say that, and I'm not going to elaborate on that any further.
No, we don't have to talk about it ever again. We can just say it, and you did your job. You get your check, and we can move on.
I'll say M's in 4, but I will say, I think if they lose tomorrow, if they lose the bullpen game, they lose the series.
Sure. No, and I think that's I don't want to get overly confident either. I think the M's have pretty comfortably the better roster on paper here, but I do think that game 1 means a heck of a lot to both teams, man. If the Tigers are up 1-0 on the road and have yet to throw Scooble, that's an incredible advantage. And on the flip side, if the M's take advantage of that, then you can go, okay, whatever, like Tarek wins, and then we just win game 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 rather, and go, onto the ALCS. So, okay, that's all I got. Anything else for you to add?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, let's have a good, clean baseball series. I hope everyone just has a good time and everyone just has fun, right? Hopefully the Mariners have hopefully the Mariners have a little more fun than the Tigers, though. Yes.
No, we'll see. This will be really fun, and I think that this is a kind of a cool way to send the listeners off into the series. So I appreciate you for hopping on the horn here, and we will be back. I'll be back Monday. I'm assuming you'll be back Monday. If not,
we're doing post-game shows all weekend.
Yeah. So there you go. We're running it, baby. We're here, and we'll figuratively see you in Seattle.